Welcome to the Elevate Your Leadership podcast series with U.S. Navy Special Operations veteran, CEO, and hockey fanatic Bob Pizzini. Bob discusses leadership, success, failure, defining moments, and hard lessons learned with guests who are intentional in their approach to leadership. Leadership is a perishable skill. Use it or lose it. In this series, entrepreneurs, industry executives, academics, public figures, and other highly effective professionals share their formulas for success with you.
All right, welcome everybody to this episode of the Elevate Your Leadership podcast with me, your host, Bob Pizzini. If you've listened to my podcast before, and I certainly hope you have, you'll know that I don't have a new guest every week or 2 guests a week or 3 guests a week. I have a guest when the guest is right. I bring a guest on this show when I know that I'm going to be talking to somebody who brought great value to me at some point in my past, or somebody who I know will bring great value. But more importantly, these are people who I know are going to bring great value to you just by listening to the discussion that we're about to have. Today's guest has an incredible professional working background. He's an incredible guy. He's a family man. His name is Dave Cooper. And Dave and his family have been friends of our family, our wives, our kids, etc., for a number of years now, and it's great to finally get Dave on the show. Dave, before I officially welcome you, I'm going to go ahead and read your bio. Dave Cooper, a distinguished former U.S. Navy SEAL and an expert in change leadership and complex system science, has a career marked by valor, innovation, and leadership. Born and raised in Mannheim, Pennsylvania, Dave embarked on a remarkable journey that took him from the prestigious Naval Special Warfare Development Group to the halls of Oxford and HEC Paris. You're going to have to tell us what that means, HEC Paris. I did Google it, and it just says HEC Paris. And finally, to the forefront of organizational health and change leadership. Love organizational health. In his 25-year military career, Dave was at the heart of critical operations across Eastern Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. His leadership and strategic acumen were instrumental in some of the most significant special operations missions in U.S. military history. Folks, I'm going to say that one more time. His leadership and strategic acumen were instrumental in some of the most significant special operations missions in U.S. history. Recognized for his extraordinary service, Dave's decorations include a Silver Star, 6 Bronze Stars with the V, which stands for Valor, devices, and numerous other honors, each a testament to the teamwork and courage that defined his military tenure. After retiring, Dave's quest for knowledge led him to earn master's degrees in change leadership at the University of Oxford and HEC Paris, and a second master's degree in complex adaptive system science, where physics meets biology and economics. Holy cow, that hurts to even say. At Arizona State University. Today, as the founder of Verge, Dave integrates high-performance teaming concepts from his SEAL days with advanced organizational and complex system science theories to guide businesses and teams through complexity and change. Businesses are ecosystems, not machines, and they have to be treated as such. His unique approach has made him a sought-after coach and consultant, impacting diverse sectors, including multinational corporations, professional sports teams, and tech startups. Dave's insights on leadership and team dynamics are also featured in his best-selling book, The Culture Code. Outside of his professional endeavors, he is a devoted family man, married to the accomplished Mrs. Sonia Cooper, and a proud father of 3 boys. In his spare time, I don't know when you have any after all those academic endeavors, in his spare time, Dave enjoys mountain biking and traveling. He also lends his unique insights into ecosystem resilience and human dynamics to nonprofits seeking to help veterans transition and cope with the stress of military operations and long deployments. For those looking to navigate the complexities of organizational change with a seasoned guide, Dave Cooper stands ready to lead the way. Dave Cooper, welcome to the Elevate Your Leadership podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I usually put my glasses on to read that, but I didn't have them. Actually, there they are. I couldn't find them a second ago.
It's all good.
So here we go. So Dave, I've been wanting to have you on the podcast really since I started it 3 years ago.
Yeah, right
And it's lucky for me that I'm uniquely positioned to know people like you and to have access to people like you, people who have such a stellar record of accomplishment that, that your willingness to share your experiences can only bring great value to other people. I always start out my discussions with your background and where you grew up, and I'm going to go there in just a second, but let's just hit some of the things on the resume. HEC Paris. Does HEC stand for something?
Yeah, well, it does in French, yeah. But HEC Paris is one of Europe's best business schools, right? It is one of the most renowned business schools in the world, right? We live in the United States, so we think of Harvard and places like that. But HEC is really sought after, one of the top business schools out there. And the program that I was involved in was jointly offered by the University of Oxford and HEC Paris. So I kind of went back and forth from pub to French cafe and occasionally went to class.
Okay, all right. So a wine drinker probably.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So your advanced academics are, or your academics are very advanced, I guess is the way to put that. Did you pursue any of that, or did you complete any of that while you were still on active duty?
No, I was a budding molecular biologist when I came into the SEAL teams. Was only supposed to be for a couple of years. I took obviously it was 25 years, but when I got out, when I retired, I went back to what was my first love, and that was the sciences.
Wow. Okay. All right. So let's go back. Mannheim, Pennsylvania. What's it like growing up in Mannheim? I don't think I've heard of that town.
Yeah, Mannheim, PA. About an hour and a half west of Philly in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So it's kind of the heart of the Amish country in Pennsylvania.
Oh.
So
okay.
I grew up, Mannheim is very much a farming community. Lots of Amish, lots of Mennonites, and then, of course, lots of just people in general. But yeah, it's a tiny little town, probably 10, 15,000 people.
Okay. All right. Sports? Did you play sports as a kid?
Football, wrestling, baseball.
All in Mannheim.
In Mannheim.
That tiny town had those programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very great wrestling team. Pennsylvania's kind of known for wrestling. Mannheim was one of those towns that was dominant. A lot of farm kids, right? They're
sure, absolutely. Kids, yeah. They tend to make good seals.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of seals from Pennsylvania as well. I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe it's an attempt to escape Pennsylvania. I don't know. But yeah, football, baseball, wrestling. I really fell in love with wrestling. I was a collegiate wrestler, although I wrestled at the Division III level, not the Division I level, but still in Pennsylvania. It was, incredibly competitive.
Yeah, wow.
Just at the Division III level, I couldn't skip, organic chem lab because I had wrestling practice or something like that. You had to go to chem lab.
Organic chem lab. Yeah, so that is cool. So going back to like high school, where I'm sure you were a very successful wrestler, do you remember like any coaches that had real positive influence or negative influence on you?
Yeah, I think about this all the time because I have kids and we talk about coaches. I would say that, most of my one coach in particular had an incredibly positive effect on me, and that was Coach Mast, who was my wrestling coach. But a lot of the coaches, they knew only one thing, and that was scream at people, right? Yeah. Great coaches bring talent out of people. It's easy to coach talent if it's already there, but it's really difficult to pull talent out. Coach Mast was one of those guys that
that's great.
Pull talent out of people. He just had a way. He was a great coach. We think of the pro sports world, you think of the Popoviches of the world, who are great relationship builders. It's not necessarily that Popovich is a basketball tactician. I'm sure he is, obviously, but his real strength is building relationships with his players, setting those expectations such that they can rise to that level and ultimately help the team achieve its goals.
Yeah.
Mast was one of those guys.
Well, that's great, and I love asking that question of people who were very athletic because, our seeds of leadership are really planted during those days.
Sure.
Our seeds of leadership are planted, who we are as leaders. Those seeds were planted by our parents, by our coaches, by our teachers, certainly the good ones. But then there's things, that I experienced that I didn't like, and I'm going to stay away from that. Yeah. But I grew up playing hockey, and we had a couple of those coaches who liked to scream.
Yeah.
And it's like you didn't even want to skate to the bench. You messed something up on the ice, you didn't even want to skate to the bench.
Yeah.
Because you were going to get it, or you didn't want to go out on the ice,
right?
Because as soon as you came back to the bench, you were going to get it. But I've been coaching for a long time, high school level, and it's different now. And so much of that, really applies to leadership and being an effective leader.
Yep.
So you're having this wonderful, successful college career. You're wrestling. How does the Navy hit your radar screen?
So that's a great question. Most of my friends were headed to med schools, some to graduate schools, kind of assumed that I would do the same. And, whenever the subject of after college life came up, I used to smile and nod, but in the back of my head, there were alarm bells going off. I wanted to run. I wanted to see the world. I had no idea what that would look like or where I might go. I just kind of kept my fingers crossed, hoping that something would pop up or emerge. And I'd taken my junior year, I took an elective, the history of the Vietnam War. And the professor, what a great guy, he was in his 60s, still running marathons. So he's, somebody's, behavior you wanted to emulate and be like. So I paid attention in his class, obviously. But he mentioned a date, January 8th, 1962, was the day Kennedy signed into existence the United States Navy SEALs. And that's all he did. He mentioned that date. We were scribbling furiously. Everything was essay tests, and you had to regurgitate it. And as soon as he said that, I kind of popped up. I'm like, Navy SEAL? What the heck is that?
Right.
I had nobody in my family who was in the military outside of World War II. I'd never heard of the Navy SEALs. This is 1986. We didn't have the book writers at the time.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of information. And, what little I could find was intriguing. Here were these guys operating in small teams all over the world, jumping out of airplanes, climbing mountains, braving the North Sea like Vikings. And I thought, hey, man, this is it. It was an opportunity for me to bring together two worlds that I love, the intellectual world and the physical world. And so I told my buddies, hey, I'll do this for a couple of years. I'll get the wanderlust out of my system. I'll grow up. I'll come home. I'll go back to school, and, we'll all live happily ever after. And I said that in 1987, and, it wasn't until 2001 that I actually came up to take a breath at that point. 15 years down the road of being a SEAL, but, that's how I got into the SEAL teams.
Wow. So, it's funny because, same kind of similar with me. I wanted to be a Navy diver. I knew what Navy divers were because I discovered this book in my high school library that talked about Navy divers. Yeah. Of all the places, where I grew up, Kenosha, Wisconsin, what is a book like that doing on a bookshelf in this little town?
Yeah.
But, I just wanted to be a Navy diver, and I didn't even know what a SEAL was until I was in boot camp taking the diver PT test, which was administered by a SEAL.
Yeah.
And he's like, you sure you want to go diver? We have great programs, and that was a long time ago when things, like you said, the books weren't out there and all the glam wasn't out there, but I just wanted to be a Navy diver. Anyway, so everything turned out to be awesome, but the relationship, between diver EOD and SEAL and the interoperability and
big time.
And everything that comes with a career in either one of those communities is just something to be cherished. So, what year did you enlist?
1987.
Okay, and right into SEAL training, or did you go do some fleet time first?
No, right into SEAL training. I had applied to and was picked up for nuclear propulsion officers candidate school.
Of course,
kind of led down the merry pathway, and I never forget. I called this, recruiter up that had been on campus. I'm like, hey, you told me I could be a Navy SEAL, not this third choice kind of thing. And he said, hey, you need to understand the needs of the United States Navy. And I'm like, well, you need to understand the needs of Dave Cooper. They don't align. So, I bummed around for a little while. I graduated. I didn't tell my parents exactly that I had no plans. I went to Ocean City, Maryland, and was a lifeguard down there. And I actually met a couple SEALs, and they're like, hey, we have this program called the Dive Farer program. If you really want to be a SEAL, you go down to the local recruiting office, tell them you want to be a SEAL and you want to be in this program, and you're off. And that's what I did.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so graduated buds, what year?
88.
Okay. Yep. And then what was your first SEAL team?
SEAL Team 2.
Okay, right here on the Virginia Beach.
Yep.
Yeah, so by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this podcast does come to you from the Elevate Your Leadership broadcast studios high atop iFly Virginia Beach in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So that's where we're having this discussion. And so Dave's first assignment was SEAL Team 2 in Virginia Beach. Anything cool or memorable during that tour?
Wow, I think when you think about, your childhood and all the things that are laid down in that childhood, good and bad, SEAL Team 2 for me was just a kind of pivotal time in terms of growth and experience. And we had, in terms of missions and stuff like that, there were a couple that popped up. Desert Storm was a big one, obviously. We mostly twiddled our thumbs during Desert Storm. We didn't get involved, although we were there waiting to ostensibly go rescue some rescue pilots that might have been down during Desert Storm. There weren't too many, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was just a time to grow and experience and see the world as a kid from Eastern Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
In the world, and my eyes were wide open at the time. I learned a lot about myself in those 5 years at SEAL Team 2. I learned a lot about the world, not all of it good in both cases, you know what I mean, but all of it educational. So yeah, it was a great time. I met guys there, and I was in the same platoon for my entire tenure there for 5 years, golf platoon. We still are, tightly connected together after all this.
That's what I love about the community. Yeah.
We about once a year we get together and do reunions at the
Heritage Center.
Well, no, at the golf platoon hut, which we have taken one of our friends who has a house in California and San Diego out there. So we've made his house the golf platoon hut. We muster there yearly, and
I love it, man. That is so cool. Yeah, we do EOD reunion, and my first EOD detachment was Mine Countermeasures Detachment 4 out of Sigonella.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I think 5 of the original 8, we got together for dinner here in Virginia Beach just about maybe 6 months or so ago. And yeah, you love it. It's
that's cool.
Yeah, it's so fun to look back. But you said a couple key things there. You said you learned. You learned about yourself, you learned about your new job, and you traveled and learned about the world.
Yep.
And, that says a lot about you. You're to quote Marty Strong, Marty?
Yeah.
To quote Marty Strong, you are a learning machine, and that's what he said about EOD techs. He said EOD techs are learning.
You better
machines.
be.
Yeah. But that is just such a, it's a healthy way to go about the job. When you're out there, you're learning. And like you said, you saw things, you saw the good and you saw the bad, and there's a lot of bad out there.
Yeah.
Which is one of the reasons we got into the job, so to speak, was to help address that. Yep. So what was your next tour?
Dev Group. Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay, screened and went right over.
I had no idea what it was when I got there. Actually, the funny thing is, one of the old guys at SEAL Team 2, it was his last day, was my first day, and he said, "Hey, can you give me a ride home? I don't have my car here today." And he said, "Today's my last day," and I'm like, "Hey, sure, take you home. Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going across the street." And I had no idea what that meant. It meant he was going to Dev Group, right? But all I could think of was that there was a Taco Bell across the street, but I didn't say anything because I had this inkling that he wasn't going to Taco Bell. But yeah, that's, I didn't know about Dev Group at the time. There were whispers of it when I was in Buds.
Yeah, but yeah. So, and just for the listeners' benefit, when Dave says Dev Group, he's talking about Naval Special Warfare Development Group. So the SEAL community, and if you can say this better than I can, please correct anything I'm about to say. But Naval Special Warfare is the community under which SEALs are task organized within the Navy. So Naval Special Warfare Development Group, a.k.a. SEAL Team 6, is located in the area, and so that's where you transferred to.
Yep.
And spent a lot of your time there. And I know ultimately you were the senior enlisted man there.
Yeah.
And I can't wait to get to that. But I don't want to miss any stuff between when you got there and when you were assigned the Command Master Chief duty.
Yeah.
So what was life like when you got there, and can you tell us about some of the missions you were on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got there in 1994, and instantly a kind of a bomb was dropped. They said, "Hey, half of you are going to go drive boats, and the other half of you are going to go to assaults." And I went off to drive boats. I was completely pissed off. That was, not why I came to the development group to drive boats. But previously what we had done, or what the development group had done, was they took new guys and they put them in these, high-speed assault craft, and it just wasn't working out. The new guys didn't want to drive the boats. As soon as the next batch of new guys came in, they handed over those duties. Those boats are, they're cigarette boats, right?
Yeah.
They are finicky. They are like, high-performance racehorses. We use them only for one particular mission, right? And, hostage rescue missions and stuff at sea. But, you have to be skilled at driving these boats in order to pull these missions off. And just keeping guys there for a year wasn't working. So they decided, hey, we'll take a green team class. We'll divide it in half. and you'll stay there and drive boats for 3 years, which was better than 1 year, but still the vast majority of guys who were there driving boats, the SEALs, didn't want to be there to drive boats.
Sure.
And they were biding their time until they could get to the assault squadrons. However, as much as I went kicking and screaming, it was, just an incredible experience, learning to do something that I had never done before, drive a boat on the high seas, all the navigation, doing the stuff at night, jumping out of the back of airplanes and following these boats into the ocean and, getting them ready to run, under, sometimes moonlight, sometimes not. And then going off and performing these missions that we were tasked with doing, training missions in those days, was just a great experience for me. I enjoyed it immensely, although when my 3 years was up, I went to the assault teams. But it's like,
yeah, well, I mean, just think about it for our listeners once again, pushing a boat out of the back of a large military aircraft, and then your team, all free fall parachuter, they exit the aircraft, very, very shortly after the boat exits the aircraft. At night, as you said, sometimes under moonlight, sometimes not.
Yeah.
And but basically what that means is under the cover of darkness. And, we call those mobility skills or insertion skills overall. And, that is amongst the most complex. If there's more complex stuff out there, please share. But I think that's about as complex as it gets when it comes to risk and really knowing your craft and your equipment and everything else. And just real quick, you mentioned Green Team, and I just, again, for the listeners' sake, Green Team, when people want to go to this unit, they go through an additional selection process called Green Team. And so you mentioned that they took Green Team and split them up and have them driving these boats. And they've since gone to the SWCC, the Special Warfare Combatant Craft.
Absolutely. Actual professional.
Yeah,
who are much better at it than we were, thankfully.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned, whether it's, both BUDS and Green Team, which technically is selection and training, right? But BUDS, talk about the difficulty in getting through. It's about 80% of the young men that show up don't make it through BUDS training. And then, for those that decide they want to go to the development group, there are already SEALs. About 50% don't make it through selection for the development group. So it's a difficult.
It's a high bar
task, and our EOD guys go through it with us. Which is even more difficult for them because they don't have the background that we have. Yet they're dropped right in with us and expected to perform the same way or almost to the same level as a SEAL.
Yeah, incredible. And obviously, I've got several teammates. Mainly past because, the years keep ticking by since we retired.
There's that.
Yeah. But I still know a few people over there, so it's pretty cool. All right, so you paid your penance, right? You paid the devil his dues, and then you went on to an assault squadron. What was that like?
When I arrived at what we used to be called Red Team. It is now Red Squadron. But it was, kind of everything for me. It was everything I thought the SEAL teams were meant to be.
Okay.
So, we don't recognize rank inside of these teams. The only person really that does have the military or the recognition of rank or given those military courtesies is the commanding officer of the entire unit, a captain, and he's generally just referred to as skipper. And for the most part, those guys grew up with the enlisted guys, so there's some really robust relationships that exist inside of that command, which is really what kind of makes it as successful as it is. Not just the skill we bring, but the strength in those relationships that build that culture, kind of. But yeah, it was everything I thought it was. The SEAL teams were supposed to be. You're treated as an adult. You're training at the highest levels, doing things that not just on the operational side that are hair raising, but any skill that you wanted to develop or learn more about. For me, climbing and the mixed martial arts. Well, they're like, well, if you're going to learn to climb, then we're going to take you and put you with some of the best climbers in the United States, and you'll learn to climb from them. Or if you want to learn the mixed martial arts, we're going to stick you with the Gracies for a couple months and learn from them. So those were just incredible opportunities that most people simply don't get. To learn, and so I loved it.
Yeah. No, that's again, that's one of the things about a career in EOD is some of the schools.
Yeah,
it's like what, who knew there was a school for something like that?
Exactly.
And but the learning opportunities, right? And the learning, and then And then, we may apply the skill, we may not. But what's important is when that situation presents, somebody on that team is going to be able to lead us through the application of whatever that skill set is.
Absolutely.
And that's where we all, where some people are stronger in different disciplines, different skill sets, different tactics.
Yeah.
But we all have this baseline, capability.
Yeah.
So it's just a really, really fast-paced and challenging, career and way to live. You mentioned something else, the kind of first name basis. We don't really have rank within the teams.
Yeah.
And for me, that was just always a normal thing.
Yeah.
When you grow up, when you go from 18 years old or 19 years old when I graduated high school in the community, but then when you get exposed to units outside of our specialty and they see us interacting in that way, some people are really surprised, I guess would be a mild way to put it, depending on their rank. The higher in rank, they can go from surprise to anger.
Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah. But it's, I just, there's just been probably 4 or 5 times where, we were basically assaulted by senior people because the way we interacted with each other. And I just couldn't wrap my head around that at the time, but I grew up a little bit there.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're progressing through at this point, you're probably making chief, you're probably making senior chief.
Yep.
And then how does somebody even become a candidate to be the senior enlisted advisor, the command master chief for for the most famous military unit in the world?
Yeah. I would like to say it's based on, skill or leadership ability. It is. Ultimately, it's a political appointment. We have had some incredible command master chiefs at the development group, and we've had some that weren't so incredible, like any place in the world. I will say first, though, by 2001, I was done. I had accomplished everything I set out to do. I met the woman who was to become my wife. She was eager for me to grow up, still is. So I thought, that it was time to do what I said I was going to do in 1987. Let's go to med school. So the military has a medical school at USIS, and that was my plan to head there. And in 2002, and at the end of the summer, we know what happened in 2001. The towers went down, and really there was no looking back.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I was at that point, I was a senior chief. I was in Red Squadron. I stayed in Red Squadron through the first initial deployments of 2001, 2002, 2003, and then I went to a couple of other squadrons. But eventually, it's the military. They keep promoting you whether you want to be promoted or not. And it got to the point where I was in the running to be because I'd been there so long at this point, to be the command master chief of the development group. And that was between me and one other guy. It was a stellar operator. And, the guy who was going to become the commanding officer, his name was Pete. He said, he interviewed me and he said, "Hey, why should I choose you?" And I said, "Well, you shouldn't. I don't want the job." And he said, "Okay, you're hired." I'm like, "Hey, what?" And I said, "Why would you hire me when I don't want the job?" He said, "I want somebody that doesn't want the job.
Yeah.
This isn't about status." And you said the right thing. And I said, "Well, let me take it back, because I have lived my entire life to be the command master chief of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group." And he said, "Yeah, too late. You got the job." So that's really how I got the job. And whether or not I was, a good SEAL, only our teammates can really say that. I'd like to think that, since my teammates still talk to me, that I was a good teammate.
Exactly. Most of them, anyway.
Yeah. And that's how I got the job. And I was kind of yanked out of my job as the Gold Squadron Command Master Chief, which I was enjoying tremendously. Had I my druthers, I'd have gone on to one of the other squadrons as a Command Master Chief as well. But yeah, I all of a sudden in 2009 found myself as the Command Master Chief of the Development Group.
Wow.
Yeah, right after really Captain Phillips' rescue, and then till 2011.
Wow. Did you participate in the Captain Phillips rescue?
I was not. No, I was overseas when it went down.
Okay. So what are some of your duties and responsibilities? I again, for the listeners' benefit, there's a lot of the senior leadership, whether it's officer or enlisted. I mean, there are strategic warfare oriented, tactical engagement. I mean, there's decisions along the lines of the operational aspect of the job, but so much of it is just leading the men in a capacity, leading the unit in a capacity that sets them up for success.
Yeah.
What were some of your kind of tactics, if you will, or how did you lead in that capacity?
That's a great question. I would say, I was schooled in this. It's a leadership by example school, right? If there is something you value, and I teach, so, don't teach this. I jump up and down on this stuff these days is, the importance of being the practitioner, right? If we practice what we say we value in order to become what we practice, or in order to become what we value. And from the moment I arrived in the SEAL teams, the guys I looked up to, particularly at Dev Group, were guys who led by examples. They were participants. They were practitioners. They were co-creators, right? They knew that, that this is a complex world, that even though they're the senior guy in the team, they don't have all the solutions or all the answers to all the problems that confront us. They pull people together. Again, those relationships are robust, and they take all kinds of ideas in, and they co-create solutions to these complex problems. And that's really how I continued to lead. I had really two initiatives, but they're both revolved around education. If you went to Dev Group now, you probably can't spit without hitting an operator that has a college degree.
Yeah,
a lot of all have college degrees, or most of them have college degrees. But back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, that wasn't the case. We didn't have graduate programs or even bachelor's programs for SEALs out there. And I thought, hey, along with a handful of other guys, that we should have this opportunity to get education is, kind of where it's at. So we should have these programs available, and that was kind of the one, I guess, pet project of mine that I tried to spearhead. But again, it's not something I could solve on my own. I leveraged some really energetic young chiefs who were into this as well, and ended up, over the course of a couple of years, setting up these programs through TCC here locally, through the school up in it'll come to me, the school up in the Northeast there that is a military school, famous military school. But anyway, they said, hey, we're happy to have you guys and bring you guys in here, and we'll set up a degree program and stuff like that. But ultimately, it was about it's rolling up your sleeves and leading by example, and saying, if this is important to me, I'm going to demonstrate this some way, shape, or form. And you hope that people kind of fall in line with that, align to that kind of example, and go with it. And I think to my surprise, really not my surprise, but to my great joy, guys went way beyond what I could have conceived of. I also, that aspect of education was to, be better tacticians. We tend to blow off the study of tactics in the SEAL teams because we have this inkling that it comes from the Army. We can't do anything Army, kind of thing. But so that was another aspect of the education that I still go back to Dev Group and teach a tactics course. I'm 11, 12 years retired at this point. So that was another aspect of the education piece. And again, these guys have gone above and beyond what I could have dreamed possible, and executing missions that, were beyond what I think anybody would have conceived possible when we first thought of the Navy SEAL teams back in the 1960s.
Sure. Yeah, I love the fact that you focused on the educational component, because ultimately, and that's been, I couldn't spell the word college when I graduated high school, right?
I still can't.
But then, I was exposed to Navy college, and a class here and a class there. And 10 years later, I have a bachelor's degree, and, about 4 years after that, a graduate degree. But the only point there is I know that I could contribite more just by knowing how to read and write, formally, which is communication, exactly. And 50%, I read something recently, it doesn't matter what you do in this world, whether you work at a fast food restaurant, or you train executives, or whatever it is you do, communication is roughly 50% or more of your job.
Absolutely.
And so many organizations don't properly train on that new frontline employee who you just hired. I've got 40 people on my team at iFly. Yep. So talking to them specifically about communication, effective ways, methods, all the modes of communication, these things are critically important. So really glad that you push the educational component. But what I've noticed being on teams, because it's like you said, back in the day, not a lot of the enlisted folks had degrees. Now most of them do.
Yeah.
and it's just a sharper and sharper team. The teams now are so much, they're lighter and they're faster and they're sharper, and they problem solve like they're, like AI is wired within their brains. And this educational component, I think, contributes so much to that.
Absolutely. We would see, and people ask me all the time, how would you pick a leader? And that's not an easy question to necessarily answer, but there's a lot to that, including spending time with those people you're going to put into those leadership positions. But one of the things that I look at closely these days is the manner in which you communicate. We give signals off all the time through our behaviors. It is the behavior is the fundamental way that we tend to shape cultures, and a leader's behaviors tend to be emulated, whether that leader realizes it or not, right? So that aspect of communicating through our behavior is huge. It's the informal information network and all of that stuff that goes on. The way in which I behave says a lot about who I am. It also then says, what I stand for and what I value and my expectations, and all of those things people read from your behavior.
Everybody's watching, right down to what kind of shoes are you wearing.
Exactly. And they'll copy that stuff. Of course, marketing people understand this, right?
Yeah.
Michael Jordan was great at basketball. He drank Coca-Cola. Therefore, we should drink Coca-Cola, right?
Yeah.
Tiger Woods wears a tag watch. Therefore, he's a successful guy. Therefore, if we want to be successful, we got to wear the tag. The Williams sisters drink milk. They're dominant. If we want to be dominant, and who doesn't, we got to drink milk too. Well, that obviously folks who do marketing understand that, but that plays out every day on smaller scales with the behavior of leadership. And as I say, that's why that fundamental behavior of leading by example is a big one for me. And you can't do that effectively unless you open yourself up to feedback from your teammates.
For sure.
And again, that's
even when you don't like what you're hearing.
Exactly.
Especially when you don't like what you're hearing.
I do that with my kids. It's funny this summer. My kids, 12, 16, and 19, but I hit them up this summer. I always keep it simple. I'm like, hey, they were eating breakfast together, and I said, hey, feedback time. And the 19-year-old's like, oh, God,
yeah.
But I said, hey, I do it. I'm like, what's one thing that I do that, maybe I should do less of or stop doing altogether? And the 19-year-old and the 16-year-old are like, yeah, I really can't think of anything, and the 12-year-old jumps right in. He's like, yeah, I got something. Quit asking me if I brush my teeth because I always do. And I'm like, okay, that's good feedback,
Yeah, that is good feedback.
I could find a better way to give it, perhaps more respectful, but quit asking me if I brush my teeth.
Yeah.
But yeah, so all of that stuff I think is an aspect of leading by example. And then what I tried to do as the command master chief. That means I didn't talk down to people. I met people as equals constantly. I showed mutual respect. There are guys out there in the SEAL teams with way more skill than I ever had. Mm-hmm. And I always actively try to show some kind of care and concern. And the simplest way to do that was to listen, right? To actually be a decent listener.
Yeah.
And then to act on some of those things that your teammates, have ideas.
Yeah.
Or try and integrate these things. Well, I'll tell you this short kind of sidebar. We talk about problem solving, the bin Laden raid, right? One of the aspects of the bin Laden raid was, we're going into Pakistan, which is a sovereign nation, generally frowned upon. And you had a number of the bureaucrats inside of the Joint Special Operations community said, hey, this is just another raid. We do this every night. It was not. There were so many things that were different. One, civilians in Pakistan are civilians in Afghanistan or in Iraq. There are police in Pakistan. There are no police in Afghanistan that were going to come after us. There's a military force in Pakistan. But the civilians were a big one. Abbottabad, where bin Laden was finally found by the agency, was a middle-class area, not used to hearing helicopters and gunfire at night. So what are those civilians going to do? And we had enough time to do about a half a dozen full mission profile runs before we took off. And from the get-go, the very first one, I took our role players, and acting as civilians. And when the target was notionally secure and they'd gotten bin Laden, I sent the role players up to the compound walls to act as curious onlookers to see what would happen. And you can imagine what happened. Our snipers shot them all.
Sure.
Obviously, paint rounds, right? We don't want to go through role players too quickly, but they shot them all with paint rounds. So I called the guys aside afterwards. And again, this is the co-creation piece. I don't have the answers. As the most senior operator there, I didn't have the answers to what to do with the civilians. And I said it to the guys. I'm like, I have no idea what the answer is here. We have to think about this. Sovereign nation, right? Generally frowned upon, might be forgiven because it's bin Laden, probably not. Our relationship with Pakistan was on the rocks as it was. And I said, now imagine we start shooting innocent men and women, maybe even innocent children, coming up unarmed, they're coming up little compound walls because they want to know what the heck is going on. And I said, I don't know what the answer is, but you got to figure it out for the 23 guys that went out on the ground. And as soon as I said that, you can see the way change happens in human groups, right? The stories and the ideas start flying around, and you can see that some ideas were better than others, and they started to get cobbled together, and they started to coalesce. And eventually, when the guys left, they had come to one course of action, and that was dress up one of their own as a Pakistani ISI agent, which is their version of the FBI. You know, they wear the body gear, the body armor that says ISI in big gold letters, the windbreakers, just like they're trained by our FBI, our CIA. So they have that same stuff. And people in Pakistan know the ISI by their English initialism, ISI, not in Urdu. And so, yeah, when people started rolling out of their houses there in the middle of the night in Abbottabad, Pakistan, there was the one guy dressed up as an ISI agent with a bullhorn saying, hey, ISI, go back inside.
Wow.
And all those civilians that had come out of their houses turned right around and went right back inside their houses. And, you know, just took that problem right off the table. That is creative problem solving, leveraging every ounce of diversity that we had, And they didn't call the cops. Why? Because the cops were already there. ISI's already there.
Wow.
So two problems taken right off the table, you know, by that kind of creative problem solving and communication.
Absolutely. Wow, that's incredible. That you know, so given all that, and given what you're doing today, you know, how do you like, my personal definition of the word leadership has changed over time, but how do you define the word leadership?
Yeah, that's great. I'm a complex systems scientist. If you ask
I know, I read all scientists, 27 syllables.
Exactly. You say, hey, how do you define complex systems? You're going to get a different answer from each one. Well, I would say, you know, over the years, I have simplified it. We used to do a lot of, and still do a lot of leadership development at the development group. We would take the Army's definition, the process of influence by providing purpose, direction, and motivation to achieve the unit and achieve the mission and improve the unit. I always had problems with the middle ground there. If I have to provide you with your purpose, direction, and motivation, you're pretty much a robot. So we have taken that out, and that, you know, leadership simply defined is influence in a group of people aimed at a common goal. If it's not aimed at a common goal, then it's, you know, becomes about status or something like that, and that is far less effective. But that influence aimed at a common goal is what leadership really comes down to. It's a word that only entered our vocabulary, you know, around the time of the Industrial Revolution. Before that, we didn't really speak of leadership. You had the general, you had the priest, you had the shaman, but it wasn't a word that you know, wasn't in vogue until really the Industrial Revolution. And in those days, it meant things like to guide or to be first. And I would say to guide is still a great way to think about leadership.
Sure.
In a complex world where things change and you don't have all those solutions, guiding is about the best that you can do. So, yeah, that's how I define it, very simply. Influence, group of people aimed at a common goal.
No, that's great. That's great. You know, there's so many definitions out there, and everybody I have on this podcast, I ask for their personal definition, and it's, you know, it's just a wonderful discussion to have kind of on its own, because if nothing else, it just gets people thinking. It's got me thinking about your words, you know. Mine currently is to enable others to accomplish their objectives. Those objectives are assumed to be common, you know. But for me, it's, you know, kind of inside and outside the organization. But I just love when, for me, to have my personal definition keeps me on course. Right. And if I share that with other people, they can help keep me on course. So I love that. And that's a real high degree of trust, which we haven't talked about, but that's critical to the career that you've had and the life that you've lived. You mentioned something, and I just want to touch on it and get you to dive a little deeper on it. You talked about culture. And culture within an organization. I heard somebody say this the other day. It's a former Blue Angel who said this the other day. He said, culture is the soul and muscle of an organization. And I've written about culture. I've read about culture. I've seen it defined so many ways. I have my own, you know, way. But when I heard that, man, that just made so much sense, you know. And again, I'm in the midst of a 40-person company. I own and operate a 40-person company where I look at culture every day. I'm taking the pulse of the culture of this place every single day. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so now we get into the realm of complexity, right? And we would say that culture is an emergent pattern of behavior. If you only have one person, there is no culture. But I bring 3 people together, give them a task, and a culture will emerge rapidly. So at its simplest, it's those shared beliefs, values, assumptions, experiences we have in the world that fundamentally shape and determine how we think and act in the world, right? But as a biologist, I would tell you, we think of culture in a petri dish. Culture is where stuff grows. Yeah. What do you want to grow, right? What mindsets do you want to grow there? What behaviors do you want to grow inside of that culture? But yeah, it's obviously a very powerful piece. We refer to culture as a collective programming of the mind. It is, it determines, not just how we act in the world. It often determines what we see and what we find important in the world, and the rest just goes whizzing by. I give people, I go by, as I do this tactics piece at Dev Group, there's a little bit of a leadership development that goes on in there. And we talk a great deal about culture because culture is the one thing that you would want to spend your time trying to shape as informal and informal leader in an organization. So we go down this road of culture and leadership development. But to show how powerful it is, I show them a slide that has 4 pictures on it. One's a picture of a cow, same 4 pictures all side by side: a cow, a goat, a patch of grass, and a dog. And I ask them which of these things does not belong. Invariably, they'll say the grass does not belong, right? Because it's 3 animals and a plant. Mm-hmm. But if you were to ask that same question in Asia, they would say the dog does not belong, right? We in the West tend to categorize, right? So we see dogs and we see plants. In Asia, they tend to look at relationships. They'd say the dog doesn't belong because the cow and the sheep eat the grass, mm-hmm. right? And culture dictates how we see things, and it's, again, incredibly powerful. So if it's that powerful, you would want to spend your time shaping that culture, and all cultures as a pattern has a structure, right? And you understand that structure, it's comprised of largely of the relationships between the actors in that group, the teammates, if you will, the roles that they play. Leadership is one of those roles that you play inside of that. The response mechanism, how do they react to information in their environment, and the rules that they play by. Nature has very few rules. We come from the military. We got the UCMJ with 146 or 148 rules. But the real rules that matter are the ones that if you broke them, they would lead to failure. And when we go into combat, there were 3 rules that we abided by all the time. Don't bunch up, right? Don't, if you can conceive of a danger zone, you don't put all of your people in that danger zone. You spread out. You don't cross open areas without somebody covering for you. Why? We're vulnerable on the move, so we have to account for that. And if we're going to make contact with those hostage takers or those terrorists, we do so with the smallest element possible. Why? Because we don't know what's going to happen. And so if we put everybody into that contact, who's going to maneuver to try and achieve a position of advantage? That becomes much more difficult to do if everybody's involved. So we make contact with the smallest group, and whatever happens, you got the other groups there that are ready to maneuver and achieve what we call that position of advantage over and over and over again until the fight is done. But that's it. We operate by those 3 rules. We try not to break those rules. If we do break them, we break them for a reason, not out of ignorance of the rules and stuff like that. The rest of those rules, whether it's, the UCMJ, everything from, gambling to animal husbandry to who can date whom and all that stuff, they don't matter. Not when you're in that complex world of combat, for sure. Maybe the in garrison world, they matter.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, that's what culture is again, the simplest way is it's where stuff grows.
Yeah, I love that. Again, it's something that I monitor. Something that I really try and cultivate on a daily basis.
You gotta.
But in the cultivation process, I can only cultivate so much because I don't own it.
Yeah.
Everybody else owns it.
Yeah.
The culture is, I can try and cultivate and positively influence, but it's really owned by everybody else in the organization. Are they happy to come to work every day? Do they like being around their teammates? Yeah. Are they proud of what they do? Are they proud of the organization they work for? Yeah. Those are all kind of around here. Those are all key components of a positive culture.
Yeah.
So
that's engagement. is what you're talking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you got the and that's only a 3-syllable word, so you can probably come up with a 5-syllable word for that. Come on now. So that's cool. Well, that kind of takes us to the next thing that I want to talk about is what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Because you do educate, you do train, and you're in a space that is so critical to me, a space that's so important to me. And before we jump into what Dave Cooper's doing now, we're going to take a quick break for capitalism. Folks, we'll be right back. All right, and we are back. We are talking to Dave Cooper, former Command Master Chief of Naval Special Warfare Development Group, also known as SEAL Team 6. Dave had a highly successful career. Dave has sought out and achieved advanced education, and he's taken everything he's done, both in terms of formal education, in terms of training, and I think probably most importantly, his vast experience, and he's turned this into a consulting operation, a consulting business. And he consults and trains some very high visibility organizations and individuals, I'm guessing. And so can you just tell us a little bit about your consulting work?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. This gets into that realm of complexity, right? And so, when we think of complex systems, most people would go, I have no idea what you're talking about, but the climate is the one that constantly comes up. Complex system, diverse group of actors, what could be cells, could be protein molecules, diverse group of actors, all interconnected, right? So there's relationships there, all interdependent. What one does impacts others, sometimes in ways that are exponentially impactful, right? Small actions can have big effects inside of complex systems. We think of COVID, a little tiny virus, and the impact that it had on the world. So a diverse group of actors, all interconnected, all interdependent, all with the ability to process information, right, compute, and all with the ability to change or adapt. So that goes everything from the climate to ecosystems to ant colonies, beehives, birds, bees, people. We're all, an individual human is a complex system. We are many systems put together. At the bottom of that is a bunch of molecules that make a bunch of cells, that make a bunch of tissues, that make a bunch of organs, that give rise to a bunch of systems, and that is the human, right? So I don't stay in the lab or study, ecosystems or stuff like that, but I take those concepts, I take the math too. We tend to model these systems into organizations, and I try to help them grow mostly or improve their performance. It depends what their interests are. But yeah, that's what I do these days.
Yeah.
It's usually with each client, it's about a year-long process. Change, most of us, we recognize that change is the only constant out there, yet we're humans. We resist it every step of the way.
Sure.
So how do we enact that change that's more likely to take hold, right? And that comes down to talking about culture and stuff like that, and shaping culture at the edges. And you're getting back to that notion of culture. You got a guy at, studied teams his entire adult life for the most part, Richard Hackman at Harvard, that said something along the lines of what you were saying earlier, and that is that even the best leader on the planet can't make a team do well, right? Because there's so many other forces out there pushing and pulling on people that is going to impact that culture. But that's ultimately what it comes down to is how do you take these concepts from complexity and take them into an organization and help them grow?
Wow. Yeah. So that's that is complex unto itself, to say the least.
Yeah.
And then kind of in my consulting work, I use there's so much from our military days, right?
Yeah.
So I like to say develop, sustain, or advance.
Sure.
Right. So in terms of leadership development, if you're new to leadership, we will develop you. Develop your personal brand. If you have been around for a while and experienced, there's this maintenance or this sustainment that you have to do on a regular basis to maintain your edge, if you will.
Sustain is a good word.
Yeah, and then you always want to advance. Lifelong learning, lifelong leadership, right? We're always looking to advance in different ways. Can you share with us who some of your clients are? I mean, we talked about Dev Group, development group, but
I have had. Wow, I've run the gamut from mom and pop shops to Google.
Wow.
To Intel Capital. Most of my clients are private equity types that invest in companies, and I go in behind them.
What a great model.
Yeah. Well, it's better to be the private equity guy, not the consultant, right? I guess. But I like, I had a company, I had with a friend started up another company when we had, was shortly after I got out. That company did well. I sold my portion of it back to my partners and went off on my own because I had finished grad school and stuff like that. And I wanted to do different things. But mostly the private equity space.
Okay. So are you a solopreneur? Just
I am.
One man
these
show?
days, yeah. However, I partner a lot.
Okay. For sure.
On the size of the project, right? But most of the time I'm out there on my own, alone and unafraid, and mostly succeeding. Right? Change is difficult.
Yeah.
But that's what I do these days. And it's challenging. It's fun at times. It's daunting at times. You really have to. What I generally do is get into an organization. I start teaching people about how complex systems work, and how we can start to tweak their organizations or complex systems. Diverse group of actors, all interconnected, all interdependent, all with the ability to process information. A lot of that starts with, how do we make sense of our environment, right? Which we can do this through the world of algorithms to help us make decisions, but you can also do this through the world of, just everyday decision-making, problem-solving and stuff like that. But when you get right down to it, people need to understand their biases. So I still often, we do a lot of counter-bias training where we, again, as a team, start to become aware of how humans think, which is not even remotely rational most of the time. Right. And then we can coach each other on being less biased in how we approach business problems, right? We can improve our thinking. We can actually get to the point where humans are better than algorithms, right?
Wow.
In most cases, most people that live with this behavioral economics for the complex systems world, right? Most behavioral economists would say, hey, we're better off if we leave decision-making to algorithms or maybe even to AI in the future because we tend to be so irrational. I don't agree. Humans, if we have the wherewithal to accept that we are biased creatures and
for sure,
and open ourselves up to feedback and become aware of those biases, we can do things that machines still cannot do. Probably never will be.
Well, it's called the human condition.
Exactly.
Right? So at the end of the day, we are all human beings, and the way you and I see something, the way you and I hear something, the way we perceive or feel or think could be completely different. We're looking at the same thing, but our accounting of what it is we're looking at will be completely different. Right down to, what did it smell like? Just all these different things. So, and that's the human condition. And I think that's one of the most important things for leaders to be aware of and recognize.
Absolutely. I do this thing. Your listeners can look this up on YouTube. It's Hyder and Simmel were two psychologists back in the 1940s that put together this video of these shapes moving around it's only a minute-long video. I actually showed it at Development Group as well, right? But these shapes moving around on a screen for about a minute. And at the end of that minute, I ask them, okay, what's going on here? Invariably, right? They're all looking at the same thing, but they all tell a story. That's how we make sense of the world, right? We tell stories. We have Homo sapiens. We would say Homo narrans, storytelling man, not wise man, or not only wise man. But so we all watch the same thing, but everybody has a different version of what is actually happening there. Again, you're speaking about how we perceive, how do we interpret information, right? What conclusions do we draw on that? And then what actions do we take based on that? And a lot of that is, again, culturally dictated and for sure the power of culture and stuff. But absolutely. So you will start to understand that. And we can do things that machines can't do. And that really comes down in the realm of judgment.
Wow. Dave, what haven't I asked you? What is of value to our listeners? Do you got a sweet spot, something that I didn't get to, or what else would you like to share?
Wow.
Or did I do such a great job?
You did do a great job. Absolutely. I think, what is of value is people ask me these days, if you could point to one thing that you would concentrate on inside of human complex systems organizations, what would that be? And that, to me, would be the importance of relationships. And we don't spend enough time building quality relationships. In fact, in some places, the United States military does this. They subject people to low quality relationships. Those are vertical relationships. It's in our doctrine, right? Vertical relationships are necessary for good order and discipline, maybe, but that doesn't help you become adaptable. So the United States military as a whole has an abysmal record in what we call the adaptive wars, right? Where things are changing, where enemies aren't meeting us on head-on, mano a mano. We don't do so well. From Korea to Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, you name it, those are strategic losses for us against an enemy or an opponent or adversary that didn't have nearly the technology that we have, didn't have the training that we have, yet are still able to hold us at bay and even defeat us, at least at a strategic level. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that we don't have those relationships that we enjoyed, which are on a first-name basis, meeting as equals. I look at my wife. She's got 2,000 employees. They don't know her as Madam Vice President. They know her as son. She is a quintessential relationship builder with everybody. It doesn't matter where you are in that organization. She is, when she does what I tend to preach, meet as equals, show mutual respect, right? Actively show care and concern. The easiest way to do that is to learn to listen to people. But I think that aspect of relationships is important. If we look into the political realm, it's broken down. We're antagonistic. We here again is the power of story. Those populist narratives tend to divide us, and those relationships tend to wither and die away. And I think that again, the one thing I could jump up and down on is the importance of relationships. And if you're a formal or informal leader inside of a group, family, learning to become a better relationship builder, which is not rocket science, right? But then again, there are rocket scientists who can't pull this stuff off.
For sure. I've met them. I've met them at the labs, at the national labs.
So have I. But I think relationships are important, and that notion is social capital. If you can combine that with real skill, human capital, you have a competitive advantage in just about any environment.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. Well said. Dave Cooper, thank you so much for coming on the Elevate Your Leadership podcast. Total honor to have the former Command Master Chief of the most famous military unit on the planet.
I'm not sure. I'll go with it.
And you did use a 5-syllable word earlier. I forget exactly what it was, but we'll go back and listen to it. So now I challenge you in the next discussion to use a 6-syllable word. Dave, thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Elevate Your Leadership podcast. To contact Bob directly or to learn more about how Bob can advance you and your organization through leadership training, team building, executive coaching, and public speaking, visit robertpizzini.com. Robert, Pizzini.com, and connect with him on LinkedIn.